Commander Veltar had seen a lot of crazy things in his 30 years guarding the outer edge of Caltharian space. Rogue asteroids the size of moons, pirates with ships held together by prayer and scrap metal, even the occasional interdimensional rift that made his senses go haywire. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what was showing up on his screens right now. The monitoring station's alarms were screaming so loud that his eardrums felt like they were going to burst. Red warning lights bathed everything, in an angry glow, making the metal corridors look like the inside of some giant beast's throat. Veltar's claws kept clicking against his console without him even realizing it, a nervous habit he'd picked up during his first tour of duty. "Sir, you need to see this," called out Communications Officer Zelka, her tentacles practically dancing with panic as they worked across multiple control panels at once. She'd been with him for 5 years, and he'd never seen her this rattled. "The signature we're picking up doesn't match anything in our databases. I run it through every classification system we have, even the old military archives from the border wars." Veltar lumbered over to her station, his massive frame casting a shadow over the displays. The Caltharian species weren't known for being small, but even among his people, he was considered a giant. His 4 eyes focused on the readouts, and what he saw made his blood run cold. "That can't be right," he muttered, checking the numbers again. "Run the scan again. Full spectrum analysis." "I've already run it 3 times, sir. The readings are consistent." Zelka's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Whatever that thing is, it's at least 10 times larger than our biggest dreadnought. Maybe more. The sensors are having trouble getting an exact measurement because of some kind of interference field around it." On the main view screen, space looked normal at first glance. Stars twinkled in the distance, and the familiar glow of nearby nebulae painted the void in soft purples and blues. But then Veltar saw it, and his stomach dropped like a stone. Moving through the blackness was something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't just a ship. It was a hole in space itself. The thing seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, creating a shadow against the star field that hurt to look at directly. Its shape was wrong somehow, as if whoever built it had decided that the normal rules of physics were more like suggestions. "Sir, the automated defense platforms are responding to the intrusion," reported Tactical Officer Krenth from across the bridge. "Platform 7 is charging weapons now." Veltar watched as one of their most powerful defensive stations, a massive construct designed to stop entire invasion fleets, swiveled its main cannon toward the approaching darkness. The platform's primary weapon could punch through the armor of any known warship like it was made of paper. He'd seen it reduce pirate vessels to glowing slag with a single shot. A brilliant lance of energy erupted from the platform, crossing the distance between it and the strange vessel in the blink of an eye. Veltar held his breath, waiting for the explosion, the debris field. Anything that would prove this nightmare was just another enemy they could handle. The energy beam hit the ship's hull and simply disappeared. Not absorbed, not deflected, not even scattered. It just ceased to exist as if it had never been fired at all. "Impossible," Veltar breathed, his voice barely audible over the station's alarms. His 4 eyes were so wide that his subordinates could see the fear in them. "Nothing can do that, nothing we know of anyway." Platform 7 fired again, then again, pouring enough energy into space to vaporize a small asteroid. Each shot met the same fate as the first, vanishing the moment it touched that impossible hull. The other platforms joined in, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. Science Officer Dr. Yellen suddenly looked up from her research station, her scaled face pale with shock. "Commander, I've found something. In the historical archives, it's fragmentary, mostly corrupted data, but there are records of a species called humans. According to this, they were wiped out 3 centuries ago when the Hegemony Alliance glassed their homeworld. Humans." Veltar had never heard the name before. What kind of species were they? The files are mostly destroyed, but from what I can piece together, they were bipedal, relatively small, and considered primitive by galactic standards. They had just discovered faster-than-light travel when the Alliance decided they were too dangerous to leave alive. The dark ship continued its steady approach, treating the most powerful weapons in Caltharian space like annoying insects. Defense. Platforms exploded in brilliant fireballs as return fire lashed out from the vessel. weapons that moved faster than their sensors could track. Then, cutting through every communication frequency they had, came a transmission that made everyone on the bridge freeze in terror. The voice was calm, measured, and spoke perfect Caltharian with an accent none of them recognized. "This is Admiral Lee Dong-wook of the United Earth ship Vengeance. Attention all species who participated in the destruction of Terra. Your day of reckoning has arrived. We have crossed the void between stars, sustained by the memory of our dead children and the promise we made over their graves. To the Caltharian Empire, the Hegemony Alliance, and every civilization that celebrated when Earth burned, we remember. We have not forgotten. We will never forgive. Prepare for impact." The transmission cut off, leaving only the sound of alarms and the soft whisper of approaching death. In the terrible silence that followed, Veltar realized that his species had just received a message from ghosts who had spent 300 years learning how to kill gods. Admiral Lee Dong-wook stood, like a statue carved from stone on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, watching as his people awakened from their 3-century sleep. The soft blue glow from the holographic displays painted his weathered face in ghostly light, making the deep lines around his eyes look like battle scars. He was older now than any human had a right to be, kept alive by technology they'd stolen from the ruins of a dozen dead civilizations. Around him, the massive ship hummed with activity as 50,000 souls emerged from their cryopods. The awakening process had been perfected over the centuries, but it never got easier to watch. Men and women who had gone to sleep as refugees were waking up as something else entirely. Their eyes held a coldness that came from knowing your entire species had been marked for extinction. Commander Park Hye-jin approached the Admiral's command chair, her footsteps echoing in the cathedral-like space of the bridge. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades in zero gravity, her black hair pulled back in the regulation style that hadn't changed since Earth's last days. Her uniform was crisp and perfect, but Lee Dong-wook could see the same haunted look in her eyes that they all carried. "Status report, Commander Park," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 300 years of planning, waiting, and preparing for this moment. Park Hye-jin consulted her holographic displays with mechanical precision, her fingers dancing across controls that would have been incomprehensible to the humans who first left Earth. "All systems operational, Admiral. The ship has evolved during our journey. Integration with salvage technology is complete." The word evolved was an understatement that bordered on the absurd. The Vengeance had started as humanity's largest colony ship, designed to carry 1 million people to safety among the stars. Now it was something that defied easy description. The hull was a patchwork of human steel, alien composites, and materials that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Weapon systems borrowed from 20 different species had been integrated into a unified whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Through the massive viewport that dominated the forward section of the bridge, Earth's surviving children gazed upon a galaxy that had tried to erase them from existence. The stars looked the same as they had 3 centuries ago, but everything else had changed. The humans who stared out at those distant suns were no longer the same species that had fled their burning homeworld. Lee Dong-wook closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. He had been a young captain then, barely 30 years old, commanding one of the evacuation ships during Earth's final hours. He could still hear the screams over the communication channels as the Hegemony Alliance's bombardment began. Orbital defense platforms that had protected humanity for generations crumbled like sandcastles under the alien assault. The oceans had turned to steam first, great clouds of superheated water vapor that choked the sky and hid the sun. Then came the plasma bombardment, energy weapons that turned continents to glass and mountains to dust. He remembered watching through his ship's sensors as the place where he'd been born became a tomb for 8 billion souls. The worst part hadn't been the dying. It had been the blockade, the alien ships that surrounded Earth's escape routes, hunting down the refugee vessels one by one. Most of the evacuation ships never made it past the orbital perimeter. Those that did were tracked down and destroyed in the cold void between stars. The final transmission from Seoul still echoed in his dreams. his sister's voice calm and steady even as the plasma bombardment began over her city. "Remember us, Dongwook? Remember what they took from us. Make them pay." "Sir," called out Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho from the weapons station, pulling the Admiral back to the present. The young officer's hands moved across his controls with practiced ease, calling up tactical displays that showed the current state of the galaxy. Target analysis complete. The Caltharian Empire, 12 billion souls spread across 47 worlds. They provided the siege ships that maintained the blockade around Earth. Lee Dong-wook opened his eyes and studied the data. The Caltharians had been thorough in their role as executioners. Their heavy cruisers had formed the backbone of the blockade, their weapons designed specifically to hunt down and destroy fleeing civilian vessels. They had celebrated when the last human transmission fell silent, holding festivals to commemorate their part in humanity's extinction. "They were thorough," the Admiral replied, his tone unchanged. "We shall return the favor. Signal the fleet and prepare to begin operations. Let them feel what it means to watch their worlds burn." But there was no fleet to signal. The Vengeance flew alone through the void, carrying the accumulated rage of a dead civilization and weapons that bent the laws of physics to their will. The ship itself had become something beyond human engineering, a fusion of terrestrial ingenuity, alien technology, and something darker that defied classification. In the engineering sections deep within the ship's belly, Chief Engineer Bae Min-ho monitored systems that would have been considered impossible 3 centuries ago. Reactors that drew power from the quantum foam itself, weapons that could reach across interstellar distances and delete targets from existence, shields that didn't just deflect energy, but absorbed it and made the ship stronger. The humans aboard. The Vengeance were no longer entirely human themselves. Genetic modifications borrowed from a dozen species had enhanced their reflexes, their intelligence, their ability to survive in hostile environments. Cybernetic implants linked their minds directly to the ship's systems, creating a symbiosis between flesh and metal that was both beautiful and terrifying. They were ghosts now, the last remnants of a species that had been murdered in its cradle. But they were ghosts with teeth, and they had spent 300 years learning how to bite back. Emperor Zephyran's massive claws dug deep gouges into the armrests of his crystal throne as he watched the tactical reports flood in. His scales, normally a regal deep blue that marked him as royalty among his people, had shifted to an angry crimson that made him look like a walking pool of blood. The transformation happened whenever Caltharians felt extreme emotion, and now the Emperor was beyond furious. 17 colonies. 17 worlds that had taken his ancestors centuries to build, wiped out in as many days. Each attack had been more impossible than the last, defying everything the Caltharian military thought they knew about warfare. Mining stations that could withstand asteroid impacts simply vanished. Orbital defense platforms built to last millennia crumbled like sand castles. Entire fleets disappeared without even getting off a distress signal. "Your Imperial Majesty," wheezed Grand Admiral Krexhan, his ancient voice rattling through the respirator that kept him alive. The old warrior had served the Empire for over 2 centuries, fighting in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. His body was covered in scars from battles won and lost, and his left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic after a border skirmish with the Nexus Confederation. "Our intelligence division has analyzed the human vessel extensively. They possess primitive kinetic weapons, basic energy shields, and outdated faster-than-light drives. Our grand fleet will crush them like insects." Zephran wanted to believe his old friend, but something cold was crawling up his spine. The reports coming back from the outer colonies didn't describe primitive weapons. They described nightmares made real, weapons that seemed to reach out from another dimension and delete targets from existence. "How many ships do we have assembled?" the Emperor asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. 2,000 of our finest warships, Your Majesty, each one a masterpiece of Caltharian engineering. The fleet's combined firepower could crack a planet's crust and boil its oceans. Surely one human ship, no matter how large, cannot stand against such might. The Grand Fleet had gathered near the mining world of Tekla, a barren rock rich in the rare metals that powered their civilization. From orbit, the assembled warships looked like a cloud of metallic locusts, their hulls gleaming in the light of the system's twin suns. Each vessel was a work of art, their flowing lines and organic curves reflecting the Caltharian belief that beauty and function should be inseparable. Admiral Zefkul commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Dominant Claw, a massive dreadnought that had never known defeat in 50 years of service. He was younger than the Grand Admiral, but no less experienced, having earned his rank through a series of brilliant victories against pirates and rebels. His crew respected him, his enemies feared him, and today he was confident that one more victory would cement his place in Caltharian history. The space around Thekalar shimmered and twisted as something massive dropped out of hyperspace. At first, it looked like a hole had been torn in reality itself, a patch of absolute darkness that hurt to look at directly. Then the sensors began to register readings that made no sense, showing a vessel so large that it dwarfed even their biggest ships. Admiral Zefkul activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice carrying to every ship in the formation. "Human vessel, you are surrounded and outnumbered 2,000 to 1. Your species committed acts of terrorism against peaceful worlds. Surrender now and your deaths will be swift and honorable." The response came back almost immediately, spoken in perfect Caltharian by a human female whose voice carried the cold precision of someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Commander Kim So-hyun had been waiting for this moment for 3 centuries, and her words carried the weight of 8 billion graves. "Caltharian fleet, you have 30 seconds to remember what you did to our children, what you did to our elderly, our sick, our innocent. You blockaded our escape routes and hunted down our refugee ships like animals. After 30 seconds, remember what you did to ours." Zefkul laughed, the sound echoing across his bridge. 30 seconds? What could one ship do in 30 seconds against the combined might of the Caltharian Empire? He found out what followed defied every law of physics the Caltharians thought they understood. The human ship didn't dodge or weave or seek cover behind asteroids. It didn't deploy fighters or launch missiles or even raise shields. It simply moved forward through their formation like an unstoppable force of nature, like a shark cutting through a school of fish. The Caltharian weapons opened fire first, 2,000 ships unleashing enough energy to glass a continent. Plasma beams, particle cannons, quantum torpedoes, gravity bombs, every weapon in their arsenal focused on the approaching nightmare. The space around the human vessel lit up like a newborn star as their combined firepower struck home. The energy simply vanished. Not absorbed, not deflected, not scattered. It just ceased to exist the moment it touched that impossible hull. And then the human ship began to return fire. Lieutenant Choi Min-ho monitored the battle from his station aboard the Vengeance, watching as Caltharian ships didn't just explode, but were systematically unmade. The human weapons didn't work like normal energy beams or missiles. They reached out across space and touched enemy vessels with surgical precision, turning matter into component atoms and scattering them across the void. "Admiral, their formations are collapsing," he reported, his voice steady despite the massacre unfolding on his screens. "Multiple ships are attempting to retreat. They're broadcasting surrender signals." Admiral Lee Dong-wook stood motionless, at the center of the bridge, his face carved from stone as he watched his enemies die. 300 years of planning, of waiting, of preparing for this moment. His sister's final words echoed in his mind. "Remember us." "No," he said softly, his voice carrying to every station on the bridge. "Let none escape. Every ship that participated in the blockade dies today. Every captain who celebrated Earth's destruction answers for their crimes. Show them the same mercy they showed our evacuation ships." The battle, if it could even be called that, was over within an hour. Where the Caltharian Grand Fleet had once assembled in all its glory, now only a debris field spread across 1,000 kilometers of space. Twisted metal and frozen bodies drifted in the void, testament to the price of genocide and the patience of ghosts who refused to rest. On a dozen worlds across the Caltharian Empire, families waited for news from their loved ones. They would wait forever. The Caltharian homeworld had stood proud and defiant for over 10,000 years, never bowing to any foreign power. Calth, Prime was a jewel among worlds, its crystal spires reaching toward the heavens, while its cities sprawled across continents in perfect harmony with nature. The planet's surface gleamed like polished marble, covered in structures that seemed to grow from the ground itself rather than being built upon it. Emperor Zephyran stood on the highest balcony of his palace, gazing up at the energy barriers that had protected his world since before his great-grandfather's time. The shields were invisible to the naked eye, but he could feel their presence like a warm blanket wrapped around his entire planet. They had turned away asteroid impacts, deflected the weapons of would-be conquerors, and even withstood the fury of solar flares that could have sterilized entire continents. The orbital fortresses were equally impressive, massive structures that hung in space like metallic moons. Each one was home to thousands of soldiers and bristled with enough firepower to level a city. They had never fallen, not once in their long history. Pirates had tried, rebels had attempted sieges, and even the legendary Ghost Fleet of the Outer Rim had broken themselves against these defenses. Today all of that was about to change. Space around Calth Prime suddenly twisted and writhed, as something enormous forced its way through the fabric of reality itself. The Vengeance materialized, like a cancer growing in the void, its dark hull drinking in the light of the system's star. The ship was even larger than the reports had suggested, stretching across kilometers of space, like a city turned sideways. Emperor Zephyran felt his scales shift from blue to pale gray, the color of fear among his people. His remaining fleet, barely 300 ships that had survived the massacre at Thekla, moved into defensive positions around their homeworld. The crews aboard those vessels knew they were flying to their deaths, but not one of them broke formation. This was their world. Their families were down there, and they would die before abandoning them. Admiral Velkoth, commanding the defense, fleet from his cruiser Stellar Pride, opened communications with his home planet. Your Majesty, we stand ready to defend Calth Prime with our lives. The humans may have destroyed our grand fleet, but they will find our home defenses a different matter entirely. The Emperor nodded grimly, watching as his orbital fortresses powered up their main weapons. Energy readings spiked across his displays as shields that could stop star-killer weapons came online. If the humans wanted his world, they would have to pay a price that would echo across the galaxy. "Open a channel to the human vessel," Zephyran commanded, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through his veins like ice water. The main screen in his throne room flickered to life, revealing the Bridge of the Vengeance in all its alien glory. The space was vast and cathedral-like, with holographic displays floating in the air like captured stars. At the center stood Admiral Lee Dong-wook, flanked by his senior staff. The human looked older than any member of his species should, his face marked by centuries of pain and loss. Behind the Admiral, Commander Yoon Seo-jun worked at tactical displays that showed the complete layout of Calth Prime's defenses. Every fortress, every shield generator, every weapons platform was mapped and analyzed with terrifying precision. Captain Lim Jae-wook stood nearby, coordinating what appeared to be boarding parties that defied conventional understanding of space. "Warfare. I am Emperor Zephyran, ruler of the Caltharian Empire," the alien leader declared, drawing himself up to his full imposing height. "Why do you bring death and destruction to my people? We followed the Hegemony Alliance's orders during the war. We are not your true enemy. Your quarrel is with them, not us." Admiral Lee Dong-wook's expression didn't change as he replied, his words carrying the finality of judgment passed down from on high. "You participated. Your ships formed the blockade that trapped our evacuation vessels. Your weapons turned our cities to glass and our oceans to steam. Your people celebrated in the streets when the last human transmission fell silent. You made yourselves our enemy the moment you chose to help murder 8 billion innocent souls." As if to punctuate his words, the planetary shields that had protected Calth Prime for millennia simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no dramatic failure of power systems. They just weren't there anymore, as if they had never existed at all. The orbital fortresses tried to respond, their massive weapons turning toward the Vengeance with desperate fury. They never got the chance to fire. The human ship's weapons reached out across space with surgical precision, not destroying the fortresses, but systematically disassembling them piece by piece. But something impossible happened. Instead of the crews dying in the vacuum of space, They simply vanished in sparkles of light, teleported aboard the Vengeance faster than the eye could follow. What made the display even more terrifying was the restraint the humans showed. Military installations disappeared without a trace, but the civilian cities below remained untouched. Power grids were severed with precision that spoke of absolute control, plunging entire continents into darkness without harming a single innocent life. It was a demonstration of power so complete that resistance seemed not just futile, but laughably inadequate. Admiral Velkoth's voice crackled over the communication system, filled with disbelief. "Your Majesty, our weapons aren't even scratching their hull. Our best shots are just vanishing before they make contact. It's like they're not even there." Emperor Zephyran watched his empire crumble around him, feeling smaller and more helpless than he had since he was a child. The orbital defenses that had protected his world for 10,000 years were gone. The fleet that had conquered a dozen star systems was space dust. Even his planetary shields, powered by the core of his world itself, had been switched off like a simple light. "What do you want from us?" he whispered, the fight draining out of him like water from a broken cup. "What will it take for you to spare my people?" Admiral Lee Dongwook's eyes never wavered as he delivered his answer. "Acknowledgement of what you did, full admission of guilt for your role in the genocide of humanity, and assurance that such crimes will never again be considered acceptable by your species or any other. Your empire will serve as our first example to the galaxy of what happens when innocents are slaughtered." The Emperor felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. His advisors were shouting in the background, some calling for continued resistance, others begging him to surrender. But Zephyran knew the truth that none of them wanted to face. The age of easy conquest was over. The humans had returned from the grave, and they had brought justice with them. In the space around Calth Prime, the last remnants of the Caltharian fleet drifted powerless. Their crews teleported away before their ships were gently nudged into safe orbits. The planet below was dark but alive, its people frightened but unharmed. It was mercy wrapped in demonstration of absolute power, forgiveness offered at the point of a sword that could cut through reality itself. The ghosts of terror had come home, and they were ready to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget: the key. News spread across the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. The Caltharian Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in known space, had fallen in a matter of days. But the most shocking part wasn't the speed of their defeat. It was what had happened to them afterward. Commander Park Hyejin walked through the corridors of the Vengeance, marveling at the changes that had taken place since the siege of Calth Prime. Caltharian crew members worked alongside humans at every station, their blue scales gleaming under the ship's soft lighting. But these weren't prisoners or slaves. They were volunteers, their eyes bright with purpose and understanding. She paused at one workstation where a young Caltharian named Veltara was helping Lieutenant Kim Soo-jin calibrate the ship's sensors. The alien's tentacles moved with practiced precision across the controls, and when she looked up at Park Hyejin, there was genuine warmth in her expression. "Commander," Veltara said in accented but perfect Korean, "the integration protocols are working better than we hoped. My people are learning so much about the true cost of our actions. We want to help make things right." Park Hyejin nodded, still amazed by the transformation. When the Caltharians had first been brought aboard the Vengeance, they had been terrified, expecting torture or execution. Instead, they had been shown something far more powerful: the complete truth of what their empire had done to humanity. Through advanced neural interfaces that the humans had developed during their centuries in exile, the Caltharians had experienced the final days of Earth firsthand. They had felt the terror of families trying to escape the bombardment, the desperation of parents putting their children on evacuation ships, the agony of watching their homeworld burn. The experience had broken them, but in breaking it had also redeemed them. Admiral Lee Dongwook stood on the main bridge, preparing for the most important transmission of his long life. Around him, the vast space bustled with activity as crew, members from a dozen different species, worked together toward a common goal. The bridge itself had evolved, growing larger and more complex as new technologies were integrated into the ship's systems. "Admiral, Quantum transmission array is ready, reported Captain Song Hye-kyo from her station. She commanded the ship's integration protocols now, overseeing the delicate process of bringing former enemies into the fold. Her work had turned the Vengeance from a weapon of revenge into something unprecedented, a mobile civilization dedicated to justice. The main view screen flickered to life, showing not one world but hundreds. The transmission was being broadcast across the galaxy, reaching every major civilization and species that had participated in humanity's genocide. On worlds light years apart, alien leaders gathered around their communication systems, waiting to hear what the ghosts of terror had to say. To the Hegemony Alliance, and all who participated in the Terror Genocide, Admiral Lee Dong-wook began, his voice carrying across the void to reach 1,000 different worlds. Humanity has returned. We are no longer the primitive species you tried to exterminate 3 centuries ago. We are no longer bound by the limitations that allowed our world to burn. Behind him, the camera captured the incredible sight of the Vengeance's bridge. Humans worked alongside Caltharians, their former enemies now their closest allies. Holographic displays showed star maps and tactical readouts that defied conventional understanding of technology. The ship itself seemed alive, its walls pulsing with energy that responded to the thoughts and emotions of its inhabitants. The Vengeance is not merely a ship, the Admiral continued, his weathered face showing the weight of centuries, but also an unbreakable determination. It is home to 50,000 souls who have transcended death itself, merged with technology beyond your comprehension. We have become something new, something that cannot be stopped by conventional weapons or destroyed by overwhelming numbers. On the Nexus Confederation homeworld, Supreme Chancellor Krextal watched the transmission with growing horror. His species had provided the plasma bombardment weapons that had turned Earth's continents to glass. Behind him, his military advisors whispered frantically about mobilizing their fleets, but the Chancellor knew it was already too late. The humans had demonstrated their power, and resistance seemed not just futile, but suicidal. Captain Song Hye-kyo monitored the integration chambers, deep within the Vengeance, where thousands of former Caltharian soldiers were undergoing the transformation process. They weren't being brainwashed or forced to serve. They were being shown the truth, given the chance to understand the full scope of their crimes, and offered redemption through service. You have a choice, Lee Dong-wook's voice echoed across the galaxy, reaching species that had thought themselves untouchable. Submit to judgment and join us in building something better, or face the same systematic dismantling that befell the Caltharian Grand Fleet. We have patience. We have waited 3 centuries for this moment. We can wait 3 more if necessary. Lieutenant Han Yu-jin sat at the communications station, monitoring responses from across known space. The reactions were as varied as the species themselves. Some civilizations immediately began broadcasting surrender signals, their leaders begging for mercy and promising to make amends. Others marshaled their fleets, convinced that their superior numbers or advanced technology would succeed where the Caltharians had failed. A few simply went silent, their communication networks shutting down in the desperate hope that if they made no sound, the humans might overlook them. But the Vengeance's sensors were beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, capable of detecting life signs from across star systems and analyzing the guilt written in quantum signatures around every world. The Vorthan Syndicate tried to flee, their entire civilization packing up and heading for the Galactic Rim. The Nexus Confederation began building new weapons, convinced that their particle disruptors could penetrate the human ship's impossible defenses. The Stellar Hegemony attempted diplomacy, sending ambassadors with offers of tribute and alliance. None of it mattered. The humans had moved beyond such simple concepts as conquest or revenge. They had become something else entirely. Judges, jury, and executioner, all wrapped into one unstoppable force that crossed the galaxy with the patience of eternity. As the transmission ended, space around the Vengeance began to fold and twist. The ship didn't simply jump to faster-than-light travel. It stepped outside normal space-time entirely, moving through dimensions that existed between the cracks of reality. When it reappeared, it would be at the next target on their list, bringing justice to those who had celebrated humanity's extinction. The age of easy genocide was over, the time when powerful civilizations could wipe out entire species without consequence had ended with Earth's rebirth. In its place came something the galaxy had never known, accountability that stretched across centuries, delivered by ghosts who had refused to rest until every crime was answered. On a million worlds, alien children looked up at the stars and wondered what was coming for them. Their parents, who had celebrated the death of humanity, now faced a future where their own crimes would be remembered and judged. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as humanity's judgment spread across the void, patient as death and inexorable as time itself. The ghosts of terror had returned, and they would not rest until justice was served on every world that had participated in their people's murder. The galaxy would learn what humanity had always known, that some crimes echo across eternity, and some debts can only be paid in full. The end